Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another Teacher Joseph podcast. Today we have a very interesting topic. That is the question, why do we not have identity cards in the UK? You might think when you come here, one of the first things that you would like to do is to go to the local government office or police station and ask about ID cards. But actually, we don't have them. Isn't it strange? We're one of the only countries, I think, perhaps there's a few others, where we're not required to carry identification with us at all times. This does cause a few problems even for us, because public institutions, and private institutions, if we approach them, ask us to prove who we are. So, for example, if I want to open a bank account today, the bank will say, okay, yeah, you can open a bank account here, but you need to give me 2 forms of ID, one with a picture. And that means that I have to go and get my passport. I think for banks, they also require, in addition to 2 forms of ID, proof of where you live. So there's no central database that the bank can just pull this information from. There's no ID card to show the bank, so I have to prove to them who I am. They don't go looking for information about me. It's very strange and unhelpful sometimes, especially if you are trying to deal with, for example, banks, government departments. If I want to open an electricity account, these kind of things, the first thing they will say is, okay, yeah, prove who you are, and that's no problem. And that is a little bit hard. So why don't we just have ID cards? Wouldn't that be the most sensible thing to do? Well, there's a couple of things. Let's look at history first of all. We never had ID cards. There was always a feeling that to collect information about people would be somehow undemocratic, because it could be used to build profiles on people's identities, such as hair color or religion, or the government could be collecting information in an unhelpful way. So I think the government always wanted to avoid trying to build any database so that no one could accuse it of being discriminatory. Because if it built a database, for example, of many people who were blonde-haired and blue-eyed, and let's say that other people weren't on that database, there could almost certainly be some kind of accusation about the database they were building. Also, it would contain information which would be considered private, like your date of birth or perhaps where you live, and our government is not allowed to collect information like this. So there are many ways the government can find out about you, of course. There's other databases it can look upon, like there must be a database for driving licenses, there'll be databases for people's taxes. So it's not like the government don't know who you are if they really want to find out, but they're not allowed to keep any kind of central information about you that they can pull on. About ID cards, they probably would be very undemocratic, but there is a voice and an opinion which comes up in our parliament every few years, which kind of says that we really should have them, especially in these days of immigration. There's an increasing number of people who believe that a database would be a good idea, but I think the governments are too afraid to bring it in. During the war, ID cards were issued as a security measure but only for those years during the war to enable people to collect their food, which was rationed, and these kinds of things. There was a need to issue people with a kind of a card, but as soon as the war was over, then it finished. So is there not a danger then that you could just pretend to be somebody else? Well, not really. I mean, it's nothing to do with honesty. I think identity fraud is a big issue here, and there are people who steal other people's identities. But at the end of the day, you really have to prove who you are to any authorities. So you need to have a bank account in your own name. You need to have other certain forms of ID with you. If the police stop you, for example, if they stop your car and they say, okay, who are you? We think you're, let's just say, for example, we think you're driving under the influence of alcohol, so who are you? If you have no documents on your person, if you don't carry your passport or if you don't have your bank cards with you, they will take your details and they will say, okay, well, come to the police station tomorrow with your identity documents, the documents which can identify you, such as your driving license and other things, and we'll talk to you then. So you see, they pass the responsibility back to us to prove who we are. And of course, the police will take a note of the car registration number and the name of who you say you are. We're just a small island. I mean, it's very unlikely that somebody is going to run away from that. But you could end up in big trouble if you try to lie to them or not tell the truth. So that's it. Yeah, no identity cards. The onus, as we say, or the responsibility is on us to prove who we are at all times. And if we abuse that system, we can get into very serious trouble. We don't need to carry our passports with us all the time. Even a bank card sometimes is enough to prove who we are. I went to the pharmacy a few days ago to pick up some medication, and they asked me who I was. They asked me for my name and to confirm my address and to confirm my date of birth. And that's usually all I need. Sometimes they might say, okay, if it's perhaps strong medication, they might say, okay, just show us some ID, please. And my bank card is enough for that, So it isn't really a problem for us because we're accustomed to knowing what to show them. But if, for example, someone steals my bank card and tries to use it to collect my medication, they would have to know a bit about me. They would have to know my date of birth. They would have to know my home address. So it's not usually just one thing shops ask for. It's usually one or two things which would be extremely personal. A little bit like logging into the internet. Some sites, they ask you for your date of birth. They might ask you to reset your password using your postcode. It's that kind of thing, But no ID cards. Is it right or is it wrong? Well, it's not for me to say, but certainly there is a fear that we would be building a database based on how a person looks, what a person's religion is, and that could be used to discriminate. So that's why they avoid it at all costs. I think these are lessons that we learned from the Second World War. I know that some other countries refuse to keep statistics on people who live in their country, and that's for the same reason. They really learned the lesson from the Second World War that you can't simply build databases based on certain criteria of the people who live there. But in complete contrast to that, most countries in the world have a need for identity cards. So I think it's probably something which will come eventually. Okay, that's it. See you. Bye.